Everything is connected by water. Sea to cloud. Cloud to rain. Rain to river. River to sea. When you touch water in one place, you're touching it everywhere. I've always been called to water and the beings that live in it, and have tried, however humbly, to tell stories about the most beloved beings from my home waters I hope will remain long after I'm gone. In 2014, I made a film called The Breach that was my best version of a love story for wild salmon.
Once, we were so many, we couldn't be counted.
I'd hoped it could help them. That story culminated with the most imminent threat to the last fully intact wild salmon run left on Earth. The Pebble Limited Partnership had been trying to construct a copper mine in the headwaters of Bristol Bay's salmon country for decades. In 2015, it looked like all the exhaustive efforts made by so many people over many years to protect this place had been worth it. Bristol Bay was offered protection, and it looked like the gates would hold. Everyone I talked to asked the same question: isn't that fight over? It looked that way. But something unexpected came to pass, and an ominous threat descended once again onto Bristol Bay's future, and also onto mine. I had a dream, and you were there. Same as last year and the 5,000 before. And you and we were safe. Then I woke and you were gone. I remembered my life and sank under the surface again. Sinking rapidly. In 4 days' time, I learned my grandma Dorothy was dying. My mom was diagnosed with cancer, and our country tore further apart with a divisive election. The election results put Bristol Bay's wild salmon back in immediate danger. My North Star faded. It was too much to feel all at once, so I crushed my feelings with alcohol. I drank first to grieve, then once the addiction took hold, just to survive. I could see the bottom coming, but right up until the end, I believed my drinking and life itself could somehow coexist. I was wrong. Withdrawing from alcohol can be fatal. 3 days after burying my grandma, I walked into a hospital and asked the people inside to save my life. Without them and the angels who loved me when I was incapable of loving myself, I would have drowned in my disease. It's a small miracle I'm on a plane with my film gear 50 days later, sober, but very much still shaken. Still feeling like I could go down in flames at any moment. I'm heading back to Bristol Bay. I've joined the crew of the Ava Jane, a sockeye salmon drift netter out of Naknek, Alaska. I'm not in a good space. Something beyond me is driving me to continue, but I might not be able to do this. Still, I'm here now, in a place that's been exactly the same for 10,000 years. A place that, just like me, is in deep shit.
We had an exclusive investigative story. We told you how the head of the EPA, Scott Pruitt, moved to withdraw environmental restrictions for this area. Alaska's Bristol Bay, which is a pristine spot, is home to one of the largest salmon fisheries. The restrictions for the area were put in place by the Obama administration after years of scientific study showed that mining the area would cause irreversible damage. But last May, Mr. Pruitt quietly moved to drop those restrictions after meeting a mining company CEO who wants to dig a massive mine there. What's more, the lifting of the restrictions was done with no discussion with EPA scientists or experts of the region. Now, if it goes forward, the protection would be scrapped, wiped away.
In the breach at the end of the film, we reported that after a 3-year scientific study, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency put a preemptive halt to permitting the Pebble Mine as a necessity to protect Bristol Bay. It was a preemptive action because in the United States, once the permitting process has begun for a mine, some version of that mine has been approved and built every single time. Lots has changed in a few short years. I tried over and over again to talk to Pebble representatives and mine supporters while I was filming the breach. Nobody responded. Now, Pebble's CEO has agreed to an interview on the first call.
We spent $750 million on a project to take it into permitting, and all of a sudden, EPA says they won't let us into permitting. And now this administration has changed that policy. And the statute says if we get a permit, EPA at that point can decide whether it wishes to veto this project. I don't think it will if we get a permit.
The process of researching this out, it would appear, according to what I've seen, that once mines commit to getting into the permit process and decide they're going to wade through the whole thing, according to my research, a mine has never been not permitted once they've got into that. Is that accurate information?
I think it's pretty close to accurate, but I think it may leave a misperception. 404 permitting process is really not designed to do this, okay? It's designed to take what a developer suggests as their preferred alternative and to change it so that it's the most environmentally protective alternative. The condition could be set on size for us. A condition could be set on where our tailings facility has to be, on what kind of tailings facility it is, and then the developer has to decide whether they want to build that or not. You wouldn't spend $750 million getting ready to go into permitting if you didn't have a high level of confidence that your science was adequate to come out of the permitting process with a project that could be built. You'd be an idiot to do that. And so we've done it, and we're very confident we're going to be able to come out of this with a permit.
If I'm hearing this right, the only chance this mine won't be permitted in some form is if the EPA vetoes the final permit. The same EPA that just reversed a veto decision to allow the mine back into permitting. I'm not sure I have the right tools for all this in my new Sober Guy toolkit. There are moments I don't know if this mine can be stopped, or if I can keep going. And that usually means I'm thinking about one thing: myself. One of the first things I discovered in recovery is that this disease is fed by isolation. I isolate, I drink, I die. But there is an antidote: community. So I cast a net into a deeper pool of people I admire greatly to see if their collective wisdom could restoke the embers inside me to keep fighting. Adrian Grenier is best known for his entourage on TV. Strangely enough, his real-life drive to eradicate plastic straws from the world's oceans was fueled by reaching out beyond himself as well.
I think it's important to find something you can focus on, something that is achievable, something that you can touch and taste and see as becoming a reality. Make one friend to do this work with, because you'll hold each other accountable, you can synthesize ideas, and you can also share in the successes and have fun. Don't do it alone. You don't have to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders.
I'm quickly discovering how much I can learn about saving these things I love from a support community who toil to save the things they love with all their hearts, no matter what that thing may be. Zarya Foreman is an artist who's ventured to the world's remotest places documenting disappearing ice flows. It's heart-wrenching and beautiful at the same time. Somehow, she captures the breadth of the global climate crisis in the confines of her canvas. All the while,
it's very important for me to focus on the positive, and that's why I depict the beauty as opposed to the devastation. So when I make my drawings, I'm trying to create these huge images just overflowing with detail that draw people in and inspire them. Instead of, you know, when you're bombarded with terrifying news, there's all kinds of terrifying news that you can find out there about climate change. But That to me is just paralyzing because it's such a massive issue and it's like, where do I even begin? I don't even know. And so focusing on the positive, I think, is empowering. That's what I'm trying to do with my work, to celebrate these landscapes that are still here and to inspire people to want to do something to help protect them.
I've spoken with a lot of pro-development Alaskans and fishermen who make their livelihood in the lower 48, a lot of people down in Seattle. They don't really feel that the mine is worth the risk in Bristol Bay. What do you say to these folks?
One thing I say is that I don't think they know the facts. If we talk about the project we're proposing and talk about the safeguards we have and talk about, if there is some kind of cataclysmic accident, what does that really mean? What happens then? If we talk about those things, I don't think there's any way that there's a real risk to the salmon in Bristol Bay. But the second thing is, it's pretty damn easy to sit in Seattle, Washington, and not want there to be economic development in rural Alaska, all right? And, too bad, guys. We get a chance to develop our natural resources the same way Seattle got to back in the day, right? And we're gonna do it up here. They ought to get ready for it.
By we, Mr. Collier is referring to the Canadian corporation that owns Pebble. 80% of Bristol Bay, Alaska residents oppose the mine. But there's over $500 billion of copper and gold here, so the forces to dig it out are motivated and strong. Thank God the love for this place is even stronger.
How they can be hatched in these river systems, find their way out to sea, spend 2 or 3 years in the ocean, and come back to the exact same place that they were born. It's absolutely amazing to me how they can do that.
Pumping protein back into the environment, bears, the whales, anything that can eat them, including us.
So you can't not think about them somewhat mythically.
Any migration that you can ever witness of nature, it's a phenomenon. If you want to see magic, come to Bristol Bay, Alaska, and you'll see magic. It's still here on Earth.
Do we love salmon? I don't even know if love's a strong enough word. It is who we are. It is who our people have been and who our people will continue to be.
It's hard to articulate in words, but it's kind of a feeling. It's raw, and it's something that the Earth is doing without any of our control. Something that we just get to experience but don't get to dictate or orchestrate at all.
That's how blessed we are here, and that's what we're fighting so hard to protect.
Wild salmon find a way, if we let them. Every other place we've settled on this planet, we've scuttled salmon populations to rock bottom, completely destroying runs in Europe, the east and west coast of the lower 48 United States, through logging, overfishing, dams, our population. But unlike me, wild salmon have no one to reach out to if they hit bottom again here. There is no place left on the planet for wild salmon to survive like Bristol Bay. And if they are destroyed here, it's the end of the line. And this thought of rivers without you continually haunts me. When I made the breach, John Shively was Pebble's CEO. He's now their chairman of the board.
Rural Alaska, where I've spent a lot of my career, has huge problems. One of those problems is lack of economic opportunity. Very high cost of living in rural Alaska because there's no ground transportation for most villages. I don't see anybody in the opposition that has an alternative. We're looking at somewhere between 800 and 1,000 jobs.
For a maximum of 20 years under their current mine plan. Yes, let's talk about jobs. Bristol Bay currently provides over 14,000 jobs and contributes $1.5 billion to the American economy every year. With a healthy fishery that is perfectly managed by the state of Alaska, that shows no sign of slowing down, ever. Let's continue.
The average job in the mining industry pays between $90,000 and $100,000 a year. It's got to make sense for local people. I mean, if all we do is bring in a bunch of outside people, which we used to be the old model, but it's got to have benefit. And the big benefit, or one of them, of course, is the jobs.
Jobs are one thing. A subsistence culture that has thrived for 4,000 years is another. People have been catching and surviving on salmon in Bristol Bay for at least that long. 59 million sockeye alone returned in 2017, over 65 million in 2018, yielding a harvest of over 40 million fish to feed the world. I'll be clear, harvesting fish means killing them. So why would you kill something you're trying to save? That's a totally valid question.
You come up here and fish and you know that this is being taken care of and you're not overfishing this stock. We've learned from what happened on the East Coast and in Europe with other fisheries and how they've been managed. So it's great to see the biologists at work up here. They really run the show. The whole fleet will stand down, 500 boats will sit for days so that we can keep this run sustainable. After being here 14 years and seeing these fish return in the numbers that they do, it just fascinates me, and there's a super big place in my heart for these critters. It is just epic, and I just want to participate in this fishery.
The state of Alaska's management practices are the most sustainable in the world. If your livelihood centers around wild salmon, this means you can depend on steady work, and lots of it, every year when these salmon return. And each of the people you're about to meet love these fish because they depend on them for their livelihoods. Alana Hurley is a Yupik subsistence fisherman in the tradition of her people for thousands of years. She's a set netter, which means she fishes from one fixed point on the beach with a gill net.
Big ones.
She catches a lot of fish. Steve Kirian is the skipper of the Ava Jane.
Bow tight. Good, okay. Good, Yankee.
A drift netter and the boat I'm on. Drift netting means you unroll a gill net behind your boat and come back to scoop the salmon up after they swim into it. Amanda Volchesky runs her family-owned processing plant in Naknek, Alaska.
Oh, those are last week.
She, her brothers and sisters, custom cut and pack the salmon the fishermen bring them. Ole Olson is a sheep shearer from Montana who has fished Nushagak Point in the bay for over 35 years.
That's what I always told him.
He's a set netter who sells his fish to people like Amanda, who then ship it out to feed the world. Ole is the unofficial mayor of Nushagak Point. Nancy Morris Lyon is a world record-setting fly fishing guide and owns Bear Trail Lodge in King Salmon, Alaska. Her guests catch the biggest rainbow trout anywhere. These trout only get this big for one reason: by gorging on the massive influx of protein each summer when the salmon come back home. Bristol Bay sport fishing contributes over 850 jobs and well over $60 million each year. Each one of these people are a spoke in the wheel of an existing economy, and one, if managed well, could go on indefinitely.
The feeling of Bristol Bay for me is as though there's a magnetic force between my bones and the very ground of Bristol Bay. Some things are sacred and they just don't belong. There are things you don't do in a church, right? There are things you don't do to the flag. And if the earth and this natural phenomenon is not sacred, then what is? I just know it's wrong. I know that in my bones that it doesn't belong there.
I think it's valuable to protect all of our wild places. We're running out of them. If we lose that, we're going to lose our connection to really who we are. And so finding a place like Bristol Bay that is a true wild place that is sustainable unto itself, the question is, why mess with it?
Tom Colicchio is the head judge of the Bravo series Top Chef, and as a chef has been leading the way toward ending hunger through social justice with his voice and his menu.
I think as chefs, we can make a choice. You know, for me, the choice I make is to try to use the sockeye salmon that's coming out of Bristol Bay. If you think about what we've evolved from, we didn't evolve from cities. We evolved as a species from wild places, and we need to keep some places out there where we can truly, you know, find our wild selves in nature, and that's what's really important.
Abayu Moore is a Yupik mom and artist from Bristol Bay. She paints life here and raises her kids, Kaya and Bodhi, off-grid, while staying connected to her people's traditional practices and values. Her vision extends as far forward as it does into the past.
Why do I paint? I paint because I have a hard time talking. And I'm better at drawing and painting and expressing through visual arts than I am through my mouth. While I was pregnant with Kaya, that was where our agreement was inspired. It shows the salmon kind of bleeding into the pregnant woman and going into her blood because it's sustaining her and keeping her alive. In turn, her body is putting the blood into the baby, and then that's ensuring future generations to continue on. This animal is so sacred, it's as valuable as yourself. And so putting that within the salmon, where this cousin of mine is in absolute danger, what am I gonna do for it? I can't just watch someone plow my family over, and then I have this baby and this cousin is providing for me. He's giving me his flesh, his meat, his nourishment. How do I convey this to somebody? This intensity that I'm feeling for my protectiveness of the salmon and its duty to me and my duty to it. And so my agreement with the salmon was, I will nourish your future generations as long as you protect mine.
Somewhere inside me, a small spark of strength is starting to flicker just by being around these salmon people. Their love for these beings feeds my own. That said, I still feel small. Somehow this is the same way the guys at Pebble are describing their new mine plan.
So if you look at Bristol Bay, just the land, not the water, it's the size of the state of Ohio, 23 million acres. We're going to build something between 5,000 and 10,000 acres, which is like a large airport. We'll permit something that probably will be 18 to 20 years in length. It'll be small, likely to start with. And so the idea that something like that could destroy the whole fishery, I mean, it's wrong.
Size matters. But how much in a place like Bristol Bay? Even if Pebble somehow weren't permitted for their full-scale operation once they have their footprint in place, the facts remain that everything in this place is connected by water. And size aside, even the smallest traces of copper are toxic to salmon. When you want to talk about disease, you ask a doctor. When you have questions about the effects of large-scale open-pit copper mining in porous, aqueous areas, you ask Dave Chambers.
They talk about making this a small mine. Small mine is still over a billion-ton development. The small mine that they've proposed is still larger than what EPA found would be acceptable in its 2014 watershed assessment. Typically, what a mining company does when it has a large ore body is they will only start out with a mine that they can justify as being economically developable to their shareholders, stockholders. They aren't really ready in almost every case to go through to a final development size anyway. There's a lot more things they need to know about the ore body, plus no matter how good you think your planning is now, it's going to change down the line. In reality, a proposal like this is just step one.
My adversaries have already started saying that we're misleading people because we're not talking about the fact that there might be subsequent phases. I completely agree that there might be subsequent phases. Nobody's hiding that at all.
It's really a thinly veiled attempt to get the camel's nose under the tent. Once a mine goes in, for all practical purposes, you're not going to stop it. The damage has been done. To even imply that it's going to be a small mine and remain that doesn't pass the laugh test, as it were.
It seems like a normal progression that it is highly likely that there will be an application for a second phase to the project. But that's tomorrow's question. When there's a second phase, or if there's a second phase, at that time, whoever is filing for the permit has to start from ground zero. You don't get any leg up because you've already got a permit for part of it.
Maybe it's just me, but I'd call a new port, new roads, and an existing working mine, at the very least, a leg up. Look, I'm a salmon nerd. I get it. I know it, you know it. But even admitting this, it's just hard to believe anyone would condone any risk to this place and this fishery. Thankfully, I continue to be drawn to and amazed by those who agree.
25 years ago, a fishing trip in Bristol Bay. Caught salmon, froze it, and shipped it home with me on the plane and started smoking salmon. Now that's something I've done every year since for the last 25, 26 years. There's a direct relevance toward catching it yourself and bringing it back and then processing that yourself too. In our home, it's really just around a center kitchen chopping block with people gathered enjoying. At the end of the evening, it's about people all bringing their own containers to pack it up and take it home. For me, the giveaway part's the best part. We have messed up every other natural run in the world, except this one. And this being the last there is makes me want to pay attention more than I ever have. Appreciate you very much.
After the interview, Mark asked, "What more can I do?" I told him, "Come to Bristol Bay, connect to it again, then tell others about it." He did. And it happened to coincide with the first annual Nuh-uh Salmon Fishing Derby to raise money for the Bristol Bay Education Foundation. We fished the Nushagak River, just miles from Pebble's proposed mine site. After hourly bouts of busting my chops for not catching fish, Mark and I quietly discussed legacy and accountability. I told him about my recovery, and that the question of what we will leave behind us has very recently been fresh on my mind. In the flow of that still perfect river, I comprehended how this story is still unfolding, and how the salmon below us are unaware of anything but the desire to make it home for life to continue, and how we will bear the responsibility of this story's ending, this story of what could be saved, and how we will be held accountable for what will happen on our watch.
I try to be concerned about the environment, pay attention to what's around me, what has been created, and for no reason can I think of that this is even not monetarily, not any reason that I think in any way this is a good idea. And the fact that this is the last one in the world, the last one in the world, is ridiculously hard for me to even consider that anybody's thinking about doing anything but leaving us alone.
Rick Halford was the Republican president of the Alaska State Senate for 25 years. He's a veteran bush pilot who's flown all kinds of people all over the Alaskan wilderness, including me while we were filming The Breach back in 2012. Rick has always supported resource development projects throughout Alaska, with one notable exception.
I don't think I ever ran for office without the support of the Alaska mining industry, and I believed, as I do today, that good mines are a major part of Alaska's economy. If you're talking about small mines in mining areas, Fairbanks, the interior, where the alternative resources are already destroyed or the alternative resources are very low value, there's lots of places for mines. But this is a different kind of a question. I had no idea what a massive sulfide, huge open pit mine could be until we started looking at the specifics of this deposit. The greatest enemy of this mine isn't politics, it isn't environmentalism, it isn't even economics, it's gravity. The bottom line is that the hole is going to be a huge drain in the waters of a very wet area.
The dictionary definition for remediation states, the action of remedying something, in particular of reversing or stopping environmental damage. Perpetual means forever. Here's what happens when a mine shuts down. There's a great big hole left from the mining. It fills with groundwater. In Bristol Bay's case, groundwater is everywhere and connects everything. Next to this hole is a giant dam made from dirt. The tailings or toxic leftovers from the mine are kept in this earthen dam. Both the hole and the dam will need to be taken care of forever, as in until the end of time. Centuries after any profit incentive for the mining company to do the right thing is long gone.
The whole discussion about perpetual remediation is scary. That's the kind of language you hear in church, but you shouldn't hear it in a mine plan. It's a risk, and you take the risk and you have, probable failure. It's just a matter of how long it takes. If you allow 1/100th of 1% error rate and you go for an infinite number of years, you still have a guaranteed error.
We have the wrong kind of mine going in to the wrong environment, and we have an existing resource that's not only very productive but very sensitive. So it's just not a good bet.
These places have been eliminated from the earth time after time after time. This is the last one left that's a complete ecosystem with 5 species of salmon and its dependent cultures and all the industries around it. And it's not worth the risk. It's not worth it in the short term or in the long term. What you'd end up with is a wealthy company far away in a 100-year cycle, but perpetual remediation for all time. We don't have the right to do that to future generations. We shouldn't be selling the legacy of salmon from this earth to some foreign company.
So what we have is people that are associated with the mining company willing to accept a lot higher level of risk than people who have nothing to gain from the mine. To me, that comes back to who should have the ability to say, yes, we want to accept the risk, or no, we don't want to accept it. I tend to lean towards those who would bear the most impacts of the development. If something goes wrong with the mine, the folks that live out there will be there, and they have to live with those impacts.
The fishery is just like farming, ranching. You want to pass it down to your children. Everybody on the beach right up here are family set netters. It's a family operation. Everybody seems to have gotten their kids involved, and we've passed the conch on down. We kept it alive. We didn't let it die.
I'd say the toughest thing is just missing your family and kids.
Hi, Ava, how are you? Oh, good, that's great.
I definitely want to give the kids the opportunity to be able to partake in this fishery if they choose. It's a great way to make a living. It's a great lifestyle. As soon as they're big enough to get on the boat, a couple more years, we're gonna have them up here, and they're gonna have their opportunity to work their way up to getting their own boat and permits if they choose to.
She said to me the other night while I was talking to her on the phone that she wants to come up when she's 8. And so I said, okay, do you want me to save you a bunk? Which bunk would you like? And she's like, I don't care, Dad. And I said, well, how about sleeping under the galley table? Would that work? Because that's, the most size appropriate for, she's like, perfect.
My daughter has picked up the banner. She did her thesis last year in English on Pebble Mine and its potential disastrous effects. I'm very proud of her. She's never known Pebble not to hang over her head. She was born in 1999, and it's pretty much when everything happened with Pebble. So it's kind of a sad legacy in its own way, but on the other hand, what a great thing for her to champion too. I hope that she turns it into a very positive thing, and I hope that in her day she doesn't have to still be my age looking at continuing the fight. I really do. Because I'll be fighting till my very last breath, and they cover me with dirt.
Everybody's wanting to check their net. It's been spotty. Like 1 or 2 here and there, 6 or 7, and they hit hard last night. That's why everybody's up and about.
Some things do not have a price tag. Some things are not for sale. If the fortitude of my ancestors tells me anything, it's that we draw strength from who we are as Indigenous people. We draw strength from this amazing place that the Creator has given us. So I think myself, like many people from here, it just gets me super emotional because when I think about what my grandma went through or what her mom went through, their grandparents went through to make sure that their grandchildren's grandchildren would know what it meant to be Yupik, to know what it meant to be a Ludakardena, to make sure that we could continue to exist here. That's not something you can ever buy or replace.
Yvon Chennar describes himself as a reluctant businessman because where he feels most at home is under the stars in the wild. His lifetime of connection to wild places has calcified into a no-nonsense outlook on where we are and where we need to go if we are to survive as a species on this planet.
You know, we're so divorced from nature that we've got ourselves into thinking that we can control nature. We're better than nature, our technology is better, and that we don't have to be part of nature. Unless we change our attitude towards wilderness, we're going to go down with the other species. We lose wild salmon, we're going to lose ourselves too. It's all there in nature, as far as I'm concerned. I can't answer whether there's a God or whether there's anybody living on Mars or any of that stuff. I'm not concerned with that. But I know what's going on with our attitude towards nature, and I want to do something about it.
Something's happening to me. I'm beginning to feel things again. It's unsettling. This is why and how I got on that plane 55 days into recovery, despite my crippling fear. The wild out here feeds the wild in me, is the wild in me. The wild in me is eternal. That thing untainted, pure. This connection to the wild is the connection to the source. They're coming to return to the source. 65 million living beings coming home to create and sustain new life. This contact with them is why I'm here. I first came here when I was 18. Spent 16 hours a day learning how to work in a salmon plant. Fell in love with Alaska. With each breath, I feel the strength to keep going, spreading like a sunrise inside me. And that's good, because things are about to get worse. By his second year as EPA administrator, Scott Pruitt was at the center of 14 federal investigations for malfeasance in office. He resigned on July 6, 2018, leaving former coal lobbyist Andrew Wheeler as the acting head of the agency. The state of Alaska's new pro-resource development governor appointed a former spokesman for the Pebble Mine as the Commissioner of Environmental Conservation for Alaska. The path to an accelerated EIS and permitting process are not only in place, but look real good for Pebble, who's hoping to close the deal while President Trump is still in office.
This question of how do you really grapple with development and environmental protection? You know, it's real easy to be the crazy old miner guy who says build a mine anywhere, and it's real easy to be the green guy who says don't build a thing anywhere, right? I mean, that doesn't take any, mental acuity, right? To find the place that you can do a significant development and still preserve the environment. That's the challenge. I think that the people in the middle in this state are going to say that a project like ours ought to be able to go into the permitting process, ought to have an environmental impact statement done. It ought to be rigorous and comprehensive, but we ought to get a chance to go through that process.
Well, as I said, I've traditionally been a Republican. I vote conservative. I am pro-development. And I believe in our resources and develop our resources, whether they're oil, mineral, or here the fish. Now that we've got a pro-development president, everybody's on a fast track to hurry up and get this thing rolling, and that does kind of bother me because I think we need to just take our time.
I'm worried. I'm worried about the things that are happening at EPA. I'm worried that protection for my area may not be taken as seriously and deliberately as I feel it needs to be taken, but I'm also hopeful.
Nancy had a rare chance to introduce this sacred place to two people with a particularly close connection, to someone who could protect it with the stroke of a pen.
I was very honored to be able to guide President Trump's sons. I really enjoyed my time with them, and they brought up their younger son as well, and so I was privileged enough to take him out and show him what an incredibly unique environment I have here. They loved their time here, and they told me that numerous times, and I would certainly hope that President Trump would take to heart the memories that they gleaned here and the experiences they had, and I'm counting on them. I'm going to have faith in them to know that they will get it right and allow us to make sure that what we have for an ecosystem and environment around here can maintain in its current form. Otherwise, they won't be able to share it with their grandchildren and great-grandchildren.
Tom Douglas's bustling Seattle restaurants feed tens of thousands with this mantra: deliciousness served with graciousness. This gratitude also reaches their hearts and minds, as you can often catch Tom preaching the gospel of wild salmon.
I can imagine that it looked very similar here when we had the runs in our own rivers, which have been obviously decimated by overfishing, by pollution, by industrialization, all the things that happen to fish, and especially salmon.
Like all places where people have developed and destroyed salmon country, we here in Seattle have watched our salmon runs fade away. The fish that trickle home here now number in the thousands, where once they were like Bristol Bay, in the millions. The Army Corps of Engineers constructed a fish ladder at the Ballard Locks to help support the remaining runs. You can watch them as they pass by. This is one of my favorite places, and I've introduced many to the importance of salmon runs here. And while every single effort counts, right now this ladder and other man-made efforts are not enough, and the king salmon continue to decline in the Salish Sea. A stark reminder that a place like Bristol Bay, perfect, intact, eternally regenerative, is sacred.
Seattle now is still a beautiful place. It's just void of salmon. When you look around down here, you can't imagine that the choice is still available. And then you see the pictures of Bristol Bay and you watch the returning fish and you see the pristine environment. It's a lot easier to imagine us not screwing that up than it is to reimagine trying desperately to get back what we had.
Avery McCammon asked me for an interview on her podcast about Bristol Bay years ago, when she was 13. She's bright, tenacious, and fearless. With what's at stake in Bristol Bay, it's damn heartening.
It's a hard issue because we need resources like copper for a lot of things that we use every day, like our phones and our laptops, things that people would not be willing to live without. And so it's hard because the mines will be built, but it depends on where they will be built. Our hope is not preventing mines and stuff, but trying to alleviate their consequences and make sure do like the most damage control possible. The more people that are informed about an issue, the more people who are going to want to fight for that issue. It makes me want to work harder now that I know that the threat is even more real. They're even closer to building the mine.
And an additional threat to the region. If Pebble is permitted and does the heavy lifting of creating the infrastructure, there's only one directive for a newly created mining district: grow.
Transportation and power are probably the two most critical pieces of infrastructure that mines need, and once somebody's put that capability into a region, it brings the costs down considerably, makes other deposits developable that weren't economically developable before the road came in.
You can't go into that process and not expect the gladiators of the economic world to want to turn around and say, we're going to stop now, when they have the infrastructure and they're a mile deep and they want to go deeper.
The threats of habitat loss, water contamination, and perpetual remediation are all very real. But the potential calamity of an explosive tailings dam failure always looms on the horizon. In the breach, we saw the failure of the Pebble Mine in New Guinea, the Mount Poly copper and gold mine in British Columbia.
A massive tailings pond full of toxic heavy metals from a copper and gold mine has burst its banks. Toxic sludge, about 2,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools worth, is cascading through central BC's pristine waterways.
Now, tragically, there are 2 more to add to the list.
Slow-moving toxic mud is oozing out of 2 collapsed mines in Brazil. The presence of arsenic, zinc, copper, mercury, they've effectively killed all aquatic life in that area for a 310-mile stretch.
We think we've designed this tailings facility so that there will be no incidents, no breaches, no leaks of significance, nothing. And we're pretty confident in that. And if there was a cataclysmic incident there, it would have an impact on 0.02 of 1%, 0.02% of the salmon. We don't think there's a risk, okay? This is if there's a catastrophic accident of some type. So I don't want people to think that we're going into this accepting this as a risk. So what happens if you do have an accident? If there is such an accident, it only has an impact on 0.02% of the salmon in Bristol Bay. So regardless of how the tailings facility might breach, be overtopped, have some kind of design flaw, have an earthquake, right? However it's breached would probably, for about 10 years, kill fish for about 20 miles downstream in the North Fork of the Cartuli. And that's where there are 0.02% of the salmon in the Bristol Bay region. So a catastrophe at Pebble would have that impact.
Okay, so that's a 20-mile downstream version of a catastrophic failure. Bristol Bay's fishermen paid for a scientific assessment of another, more closely resembling actual catastrophic failures we've seen before. Regardless, any disaster in this watershed would be catastrophic.
We're involved in 2 of the watersheds. There are 8 watersheds out there. The hype against the mine, the fear-mongering that's gone on to say, if this mine goes and is built, it's going to fail and the fish are all going to go away, is wrong.
Those watersheds the mine is directly connected to just may be the most important in Bristol Bay's portfolio in a given year. Dr. Dan Schindler breaks it down.
Of course, if you think about how people operate in the stock market, in general, it's to diversify and spread your risks across assets that you have very little ability to make predictions about. That same metaphor applies to fish stocks in Bristol Bay and probably in many other ecosystems. The reason the metaphor of a portfolio works here is that we now know that different river systems are not all necessarily synchronous in terms of the number of fish they produce. They don't all boom in the same decade and they don't all bust in the same decade. A really key thing to think about that is not necessarily considered in your typical risk assessment is that certain pieces of habitat, for instance, some small tributary somewhere, may actually produce very few fish for a long period of time, let's say decades. During other decades, that little piece of habitat can become one of the most important in the overall network of habitat that fish or wildlife would use. There is this complexity associated with the landscape that we don't understand, but the data demonstrate very clearly that the complexity causes some rivers to go up while others are going down.
The burden is that I'm not going to hurt the salmon that you think are so special, that I think are special. And unless we carry that burden, we don't get a permit. I mean, you can't get a permit if you're going to do that. And now we're going to move forward and move forward through that process.
The process. As in thumbs up or thumbs down? Or greenlit, as in all the other mines greenlit once they entered the permitting process? It's August 2018, and the returning Bristol Bay sockeye are in their home creeks making new life. The system here is perfect, exactly as it is. August is also birthday season back home, and it's time I go.
I'm Mark. I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, Mark.
Welcome, hey, Mark.
I arrive home in Seattle to a suffocating shroud of wildfire smoke and news that a grieving orca whale was on her 11th day of carrying her dead baby through the waters of the Salish Sea. She couldn't let go. The calf was born off the coast of British Columbia and died within 30 minutes. The calf's mother carried her dead child, pushing it on her nose, hundreds of miles from Victoria to the San Juan Islands. 17 days before she finally let it drop into the depths of the Salish Sea. By then, the world was watching, struggling to fathom the heartbreak and grief. Scientists conclude the main reason our resident orcas are dying is a lack of endangered king salmon, their main food source. Our two great icons are leaving us here, one depending on the other, needing each other to survive. And mirroring the danger in Bristol Bay, there's a new threat just north of Seattle that could be a death knell for our resident orcas. The headwaters of the Skagit River, the last in our region producing all 5 species of Pacific salmon, is now a proposed site for what else? A gold and copper mine. Oh, and same company that built Mount Poly. As far as I know, no one's ever confused a whale with a canary, but the warning bell has sounded, and it's deafening and serious. What's also serious is Pebble's need to push this process, and push it now. I interviewed a mining expert with decades of experience in the industry who requested not to go on the record. They unequivocally told me the mine plan Pebble is proposing is not economically feasible. Period. Pebble has to get bigger than the proposed mine, not if, but when, for this whole thing to work financially. So the EIS being done now is, well...
I mean, it's wrong.
Yeah. This statement is not coming from tree-hugging salmon nerds. These are facts, coming from number crunchers in the mining industry. There's also news that Pebble is running low on money, creating additional urgency. It would appear this is it for them. Pebble has a window with a favorable administration in Washington, D.C. and Alaska, and they have to push this now. And that's just what they're doing. With the EIS submitted and the process gaining speed, it's perception versus fact as all parties desperately work to get information to the public.
If God were challenging us, he couldn't put a major sulfide deposit of tremendous size in a more challenging place than the headwaters that separate the 2 biggest drainages of Bristol Bay. The bottom line is this is one of the few places where even with active management, the risks may be too high. This is the last stronghold of 5 species salmon and their complete dependent cultures in North America and not on the planet.
We pledged some time ago that we would not go forward with this project if there were any significant concern that we would damage the fishery in Bristol Bay. And we think the fishery and the mine and go forward together. They can coexist. They can move forward.
Addicts talk about their moment of clarity with mythical reverence. Before I experienced my own, I made myself endless promises based on the false illusion that I could control my disease. I'll limit my drinking to weekends. I'll only drink beer. I'll only drink wine. I'll only drink at parties. I'll only drink at home. I'll only drink a half bottle of whiskey a day. I'll never drink during business hours. I'll never drink in the morning. I'll never drink again. I believed my drinking and life itself could somehow coexist.
I'm Mark. I'm an alcoholic.
Through the lens of addiction recovery, I'm beginning to see how we as a society have been willing to damage our home planet that sustains us, based on the false illusion of control, over and over again.
We think the fishery and the mine and go forward together. They can coexist.
My need for that drink always outweighed any harm taking it might cause. And I told myself I could handle it. Just one more drink.
They can coexist.
Just one more river. This time, it'll be different. Deep in my bones, I know this is not true. Bristol Bay, everyone there, and the deep pool of illuminating people who gave freely of themselves are all connected now in this shared story. I'm grateful for you and all the voices who join us in the future, crying out for this sacred place to stay intact. The former First Lady of Alaska and vocal advocate for every living creature in the state reminds us how to fight on.
I think we just have to keep beating on the drum. Anything that you really treasure, you have to speak out. Speak out not just once or twice, but constantly.
And if you think you can't do it, that you're not strong enough, or that it doesn't matter if you battle until the very end, then meet my friend Steve.
I'm Steve Gleason. I played in the NFL for 8 years for the New Orleans Saints. I was diagnosed with ALS in 2011. After I was diagnosed with ALS, my wife Michelle and I drove 13,000 miles round trip from New Orleans to Alaska. I had never been there, so it was just an epic adventure for us. Michelle was pregnant with our son Rivers, by the way. She is a fierce girl. I was losing the ability to cast a line, which, for someone who has enjoyed fishing their entire life, it was crushing. I decided to give it one more cast. Incredibly, even miraculously, I snagged the glorious sockeye salmon. That salmon came through Bristol Bay. Sometime not too long after the diagnosis, I decided to stop complaining about what I deserved, or what I did not deserve, and go do stuff so epic that people would stop what they were doing, take notice, and be inspired to change how they live their lives.
A drop from the river is sensed in the sea. Even if you add just one more, that one drop could tip the scales for good. My actual moment of clarity came from one of my 10 nieces and nephews I adore. Poppy was 2 then. She and I share the same August birthday. She begged me to come to her brother's baseball game. I lied to her, said I had to work. The truth was, I was afraid to go because I couldn't drink at a Little League game. Poppy was inconsolable. I watched her sobbing red face disappear in the back of my wife's car. Then I walked upstairs and called the hospital to see if they had a bed available the coming week. Days later, I buried my grandma in Florida. And 3 days after that, was in detox fighting for my life. Once you were so many you couldn't be counted. Once I was blinded and broken by this disease. In my dream, you found a way to come home. But now I can't see you anymore. An ember still glows in my heart for your last stronghold in the north. I can faintly hear you, finning under pools of morning light on the river. Feel your tail beats in the heart of the wild. We are still connected by a thread. This connection saved me. But can we wake up in time to save you?
I'm just a man, but I know that I'm damned. All the dead seem to know where I am. The tale that began on the night of my birth will be done in a turn of the earth. Lie where I land, let my bones turn to sand. I was born on the lake and I don't want to leave it. Every eye on the coast evermore will remember the sight of the ghost on the shore. Under the waves and the earth of an age lie 1,000 old northerners' graves. Deep in the night when the moon's glowing bright, they come rising up into the light. I'll die if I must, let my bones turn to dust. I'm the lord of the lake and I don't want to leave it. All who sail off the coast evermore will remember the tale of the ghost on the shore. I'm gone away for a long time. I'm gone away for a long time. Lie where I land, let my bones turn to sand. I was born on the lake and I don't want to leave it. Every eye on the coast evermore will remember the sight. Die if I must, let my bones turn to dust. I'm the Lord